What's up everyone, and welcome back to another RLCS video. And this time we are back with the power rankings. Due to the kind of squished up week, no more bye weeks in this split, so we'll be doubling up for some of these weeks. And this week we have both a power rankings video as well as a prediction video coming out tomorrow. But today we're focused on the power rankings. We're focusing on what has happened, and we're going to talk about that. And to be honest, this is probably the most difficult power rankings I have ever done. I honest to God struggled so hard to make this list. So if there's probably gonna be a lot of disagreements out there by y'all, and that's okay. Make sure to leave your opinion in the comments. Like I said, this is probably the hardest one I've ever done. But with that, let's get right into it. So starting off, we have a lot of honorable mentions. Typically, I limit it to probably two. The people I put in 11th and 12th, but honestly, I could not decide who to put, not just 11th through 12th, but also even in the top 10. There were so many conflicting choices in my opinion, and I just decided, these are going to be the four teams I will leave off. I won't throw them in any order because there really is not much of an order, but it was tough. GK, they obviously were the reigning regional champions. They won Regional 3. They had a solid major coming top 8, and then they kind of disappointed this past regional, going out top 6 after losing to Dig. So I moved them off the list. Secret, kind of the inverse. They had a very, very disappointing major, just looked straight up awful, and then they bounced back by winning the SAM regional, which, we'll talk a little bit more about later. So that's why Secret is an honorable mention now. Maybe if we see it again, they can move into our top 10, but for now, just outside. Then we have SSG, who, after making a roster change for Kofer in place of Frosty, looked quite solid in my opinion. It was really, I did like how they played. They didn't have a very good series against Complexity in the uppers bracket, but outside of that, they took down Ultimates in the group stage. They took Jinji to the nail, to a nail biter, so I think they're just outside the top 10. And then Ninja Pajamas, they're a little bit all over the place, barely missed a major thanks to DK's miracle run. And then they actually took down KC in the qualifier stage, which was kind of surprising. And they almost beat them again in the group stage. But once they got to the playoffs, they kind of disappointed, not making it past the top 6. So that's why I moved them out of my top 10 since the last time. But let's go ahead and move on right into the top 10. Here at number 10, we have Gentlemates. Now this is kind of a surprising one because I didn't really think there was any chance they could make my list, especially after the way things started. But then Sunday came around and they looked very good. They took KC to the brink of elimination, the closest KC has ever been to missing a grand finals this season. Before this, KC had, outside of the Geek A series, KC had only lost a handful of games on Championship Sunday, but they were, right there, just about to take KC down. It came down to a 2.5 minute OT in Game 7 to, not make it past them. So honestly, very impressed with how Gentlemates played. They're, if you are not aware, they replaced Radosin over the split and replaced him with Eugen, and Eugen looked very good. I was very impressed with how he played. A little bit nervy in that Game 7 is probably the reason they didn't win the series, but overall, he looked really good, and I think he's going to continue to kind of level up with his new roster. So yeah, maybe it's a little bit of an overreaction. You could argue about that, but honestly, very impressed with how they are, and I think they, are very deserving of a top 10 spot. And moving on to number 9 here, we have Jin Ji, who also made a roster change. But what's strange about it is they won Regional 3. They won Regional 3 over, to make the major. They didn't have a very amazing major. It wasn't bad. It was about what we expected from them. But they replaced Reddles with Justin, and they took off. They looked so good the first 2 days of this past regional. They went 6-0 on day 1, and then they absolutely laid a stomping on Energy in the upper bracket. And the next day, they squeaked out a win over SSG, but then the grand finals came on, and Energy was not playing around, and they just beat them down. So it was a 4-0 sweep, not able to, take another regional win. But hey, another grand finals experience for Jinji. I like this new roster a lot. I think they're, very deserving of a top 10 ranking after the way they've been playing recently. So very, very impressed with Gen.G. We'll see if they, continue to be competing for those top top twos, maybe even regional wins. But yeah, I think they've been playing really well recently. Next at number 8, we have Dignitas. Now, Dig was a team I was not actually expecting, kind of the inverse of some of the other teams. I actually was not expecting to put them on this top 10 at all. I was very considering moving them down after the way they played on day 1. That Friday, they looked bad. They went to 5 against 2 bubble teams and then also lost to GK. Just really did not look that great. They had a bounce back win against Forward on Saturday, but I mean, it's Forward, so I didn't really take it, oh wow, Dig is back. But then they really impressed me on the Sunday, taking down GK, just kind of, beating up on them in a quick, in a 4-1, as you can see here. And then they also, looked fairly competent against Vitality. They never, they obviously lost. It wasn't, those last few games were not very close, but they looked competent enough that I, wasn't really like, oh, you're playing terrible. You just kind of got to make your bracket and this and that. So, I thought it was enough to keep Dig on this list. Not too high. They, they're a little bit on the bubble still. I think, things get a little shaky, but overall, Dig not looking too bad. Next, we have Twisted Minds, who really, kind of slightly underperformed at the major. They did make a top 8, but I thought they, could have been capable of making it a little bit farther, done a little bit better, but just not the best major. And then, they came back to regional play, and unfortunately, as you can see here, down, you see my mouse cursor, they did throw a 3-1 lead over Falcons. They should have won this game. They were up on 0 seconds in this game, and then there was a double commit on the goal line that led to a 0-second goal for Falcons, and they ended up winning because of it. Just feel like a total collapse because of this. I really thought they should have won these won this game, and they had this game was tied 0-0 into the last second as well. So really just kind of a bit of a toss for Twisted Minds, so it's hard to really punish them for that, but I think number 7 is not too bad of a placement for them. I think they're still playing pretty well, but they really should have won that regional, which would have boosted them just a tad. But not too bad for Twisted Minds. I think they'll should make the major with ease. They've made every grand finals in MENA so far, and not looking too bad for hopefully another major run. And next we have Furia, and like I mentioned earlier, Secret actually won the regional. Now, I've heard some rumors about, maybe some internet issues in that grand finals that led to Furia losing, but I didn't really watch much of it. I only caught the last couple games of it, and in those games, Secret just looked like the better team. I didn't really think, Furia looked much worse in that grand finals than I expect from them, and it's kind of hard to really, rate them higher when they have such a poor performance in the grand finals, and the teams above them all looked, fairly solid themselves. So maybe Furia, I think, is definitely one of the ones that kind of debatable. I think I could put them above the team above them. I think that, the team above them, it's kind of a little bit interchangeable, but I just kind of went off my feeling. I saw this result, and I was not very happy with how Furia played, and it was really, hard to keep them as high because of it. But still number 6, after making top 4 at the major, I think they'll probably be primed for another top 4 run as well. So good performance from them, but just hard to rank them higher when they had a poor grand finals, should I say. And then at 5 we have Falcons, and like I said, you could definitely put Fury above them, and I would not bat an eye. I think it's definitely close, especially because Falcons had not just one. I know I mentioned the 3-1 comeback against Twisted Minds, but actually they had to do it in the series prior as well to, I don't know how to say this team, so I'm not going to pronounce it because I don't want to accidentally say something bad. But yeah, they actually came back from a 3-1 deficit in this series as well to even make the grand finals. So just kind of a shaky performance from Falcons, but they do end up winning the regionals, so it's kind of hard to punish them too much for it. But like I said, I definitely could put Fury above them. I just kind of saw, it's weighing a regional winner versus a non-regional winner in this, scenario. So I went with Falcons, but it's definitely pretty close, in my opinion. And next, we have Vitality, who kind of bounced back this regional. They actually looked fairly solid. I think their signature win, looking back at it, it's going to be that 4-0 win over Mates in the upper bracket. I don't think Mates were playing to the level they did on Sunday on in that upper bracket, which was on the Saturday. But Vitality looked fairly solid. They, just controlled the whole series start to finish, never really gave up anything. And, they got a good win over Dig. Kind of, like I said, I thought Dig played solid in it, but Vitality just better team. And then they took, a little bit of a series to KC, but KC are just, we'll talk about them, but they were able to get 2 wins, but nothing much else outside of that. So, solid performance from Vitality. Move them slightly up based off my post-major performance, just a little bit. But yeah, not too bad from Vitality here, but can't put them really any higher than 4 because we'll talk about the teams above them in a second. And next at number 3, we have my personal favorite. Now, I did not make a power rankings video after the major, which was just poor, not just poor planning, but poor just I didn't really understand the schedule at the time, and that was on my fault. I accidentally kind of mixed up the weeks I wanted to have the videos, so my mistake. But one of the things I would have loved to talk about, probably my favorite part of the major, is that Ultimates made the grand finals. They really had a great major performance. They looked very good. They got some really big wins. They got took down Falcons in a sweep in Swiss, and then beat Vitality in upper bracket while barely scraping out Energy to make the grand finals. Obviously, not a good grand finals performance, unfortunately, but yeah, they looked very good at the major, and it boasted them all the way up to number 3 in my power rankings. It's gonna show number 8 because I never officially made a post-major power rankings, but I had them number 3 behind the 2 teams above them. But unfortunately, they did not have the greatest regional, but it's really hard to knock them for their losses. Obviously, they had a loss to SSG in groups, which you shouldn't be losing to SSG, in my opinion. I think you're a much better team than SSG, but they did lose and ended up having to go through a lower bracket where they ran into none other than NRG for the 8th time this season. Yeah, that's right. They've played 8 times already this season. And unfortunately, in those 8 times, NRG has had their number big time. And it showed, because they were able to squeak out a win on Champions Field. Unfortunately, Ultimates kind of had a disaster class in that Game 7. I've seen some rough games from them, but NRG walked away lucky to be alive because Ultimates just had so many chances to win that game and really just did some baffling plays to lose. I mean, you could say that about a lot of games, so that's why I'm not going to use that too much as a copium, in my opinion. But yeah, just a really strange series. I thought it was a series they definitely could have won. Just not a great performance from them, but it's really hard to, push the major runner-ups any further. So I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt for this regional, getting back into online play. If they have one more bad regional, then we'll start to have, some conversations around that, and maybe, we'll move them down. But like I said, giving them a little bit of a leeway for now, and I'm keeping them at number 3. And next above them, of course, is the NA regional champions, the team that, team to beat. Still, no one can seem to beat them, it seems. Yeah, that makes sense. Saying seems a lot, but yeah, no one can really beat NRG. It's just, I don't understand, man. I don't understand what's going to take, because no matter how bad they seem to look at times, they just never can lose. They just keep making grand finals, keep winning NA regionals, and no one can really understand it. Feel like that 4-1 against Gen.G in Saturday. I really thought that this could potentially be the end of NRG. Overreaction much? Maybe. I wasn't calling it. I was going to give them a little bit more time to see, obviously, but this was a huge warning sign this series, because they just got completely outplayed by Gen.G in this series. And then they woke up the next day. They played pretty solid in the series. Nothing special, but they played solid, got the win. And then these 2 series, they played basically perfect Rocket League. They absolutely dismantled Complexity and Gingy, giving up only 3 goals. 3 goals in 8 games. Just absolutely absurd performance from these two, and these 2 from these 2 series. So, you know, it's you can't knock Energy for that. They had some rough days. They've been all over the place at times this season, but when it came, you know, the series that mattered, they turned it up, and you know, they looked unstoppable. So, you know, despite their flaws and whatnot, it's hard to keep them at anything but 2. And at number 1, to the surprise of absolutely nobody, not a human being in this world is shocked by this, KC, number 1, defending major champions, come back and, you know, win another regional. Like, they've won every series but 2. If you count qualifiers. If you don't count the qualifiers, then they've lost 1 series, which was, you know, the shocking major regional win by GK in Regional 3. Still a wild series. No one can understand how they won that, because KC just continues on winning. Now, I will say this. This is the most vulnerable KC has ever looked, in my opinion. They did not look amazing this regional. They still, you know, at least for their standards, they still were the best team in the world. But, you know, for their standards, I was not as impressed as usual. You know, they barely squeaked out a win over NIP in groups after losing to them in qualifiers the week prior. You know, and then they played Mates in a series where they just barely, you know, once again, they just barely scraped out a win. If, you know, I think a little bit more ice from Eugen, and and Mates probably win that series. And then, you know, had a bounce back series against Vitality where they never really looked like the worst team. They looked like the better team, I thought, the entire series. So, but outside of that, I mean, like I said, slightly worse performance from KC, but I mean, they've just beaten everybody. They win everything. You know, like I said, I can't predict them to lose. I'm just going to predict them to win everything. I'm going to predict them to win every region. I'm going to predict them to win a major. I'm going to predict them to win Worlds until something changes, because right now they are unstoppable. And, you know, unfortunately, throw some bias on there. I don't like it, but it's just the, you know, reality we live in, that KC are going to win everything. They are the best team in the world. It's not really a discussion. And yeah, but anyways, that's going to be it for the video. And if you guys are enjoying, make sure to like and subscribe. Again, predictions video tomorrow for NA regional number 5. We're getting closer and closer to the Raleigh mate. I think Raleigh, all the North Carolinians are going to attack me. Raleigh major, which, like I said, I will be at the major. If you're interested in seeing a vlog, make sure to comment down below. I might do a vlog again, depends on, you know, situation, but it's potential. So if you guys are looking forward to it, looking forward to all the content leading up to the major, make sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see y'all next time.